Today, we're going to talk about the God of the storm. And I've been waiting for Acts chapter 27 for a very long time. It is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. If the book of Acts was a movie, chapter 27 would be the climax. It would be the most eventful thing in the book of Acts. I don't know about you, but my favorite part of any movie is when a hero comes and saves the day. It makes me wish Acts had a soundtrack. We have certain music in our heads associated with this type of scene of the hero coming to save the day. In the old movies, it was the trumpet of the cavalry in the westerns. In more modern times, it would be the Star Wars music or the Indiana Jones music. If Acts had a soundtrack, at the beginning of chapter 27, the music would start off very slowly and ominous. Maybe that music from Jaws, kind of building it up a little bit. And then in the background you'd hear the wind blowing and the waves rising. And then the music from The Wizard of Oz when the Wicked Witch is on her way to get Dorothy. All this chaos. And then the hurricane hits in full force and the waves crash against the hull of the boat. The crew is screaming, the captain is shouting orders, the tension's mount, all hope is gone, and then the climax music. Here comes the hero. I've been accused of having an overactive imagination, but it helps for me for this book to kind of come alive. It is a living word, but this is real people. This is more than just a history book. This is human drama at its most dramatic. Storms and shipwrecks and lives hanging in the balance. But you know the main reason I like this chapter, and it's not just how God dealt with a bunch of guys on a ship 2,000 years ago. This is how God deals with us right now, today. This can very much be applied to our lives today. So have you ever felt like you've been beat around physically? You've been beat around spiritually. You've been beat around emotionally. And things just keep going wrong in life. We ever get that feeling where it's just, we don't know how much more we can take? Sure you have. We all have. I have. You have. Like these men we'll read about, you've been on stormy seas. And if you haven't, you will very shortly. Because that is guaranteed us in our Christian life. That the devil will come into our life and will tempt us and will make things go very wrong if we are living for the Lord. You've been plunged into the eye of the storm. And it hasn't stopped yet. If it hasn't hit you, I promise you, it'll come. But I have good news. Don't get depressed that it's coming if it hasn't hit you yet. I have good news. God is there to save us from any storm we may or may not face. Maybe it's a family disaster with death or disease or divorce. Maybe it's a financial storm. You've lost your job or you're in debt heavily. Maybe your tempest has come in the form of depression, whose gale force can rip your sails and leave you there dead in the water, feeling hopeless and overwhelmed. Whatever the case may be, I have good news. God is there to rescue us. I don't know what it is or what it will be in your life, but I do know this. I do know storms will come. And the lesson of chapter 27 is not primarily that God delivered 276 men in the Mediterranean Sea. The lesson for you and for me is that God delivers us from the storms of life. We begin on calm waters in chapter 27 on your sheet of paper in verse 1 through 3. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus' band and entering into a ship of Adramyttium, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. The first way God works in our lives in stormy times is by putting the right people at the right time in our lives, even at the right places. With Paul, it started with a man named Julius. Now, I don't know who Julius was, but I know who put him there. I know that God put him there for a reason, to protect Paul, to keep Paul out of trouble, to keep Paul from possibly facing death. Julius was a man who showed kindness to Paul, when kindness was exactly what Paul needed. How many times in your life have you been going through things? You may have hate overcome your heart, and all of a sudden you have somebody in your life that just brings you cheer and brings you overjoyed. They just happened to stop in Sidon, and Paul just happened to have a Christian friend there. That is, if you believe in coincidence. But I stopped believing in coincidence a long time ago. And then I think, what friends in Sidon? We have no record of a church in Sidon before or after this. But they were there. And they were there for Paul. Two other men were put there for Paul, and they both mention in verse 2. The first is Luke. You say, I don't see Luke's name. No, but the verse starts out as, we boarded the ship. We launched. Who do you suppose we is? Well, Luke has been Paul's sidekick all the way through the first four Gospels and has been a trusted friend for years now. And once again, Paul put him on this boat to be there for Paul when Paul needed him the most. The last person God put in Paul's life, at least here, was a man, Aristarchus. And though Luke could not be listed on the ship's log as Paul's personal physician, it was a good chance Aristarchus was something else. Scholars believe that in order for him to travel with Paul on this journey, he had to become Paul's personal slave. Not that we have personal slaves, but has God put somebody in your life that you love like that? Somebody to save us from certain things. I know he has in mind. He's put people in my life who I believe would not only lay down their freedom, but would lay down their lives. That's how God works. So take heart when the steams get stormy. And look around for the people God places in your life. He puts them there because he loves you and because he knows you can't make it on your own. Be thankful for the people in your life. Tell them thank you. And God will not abandon us. And God will not leave us. It's happened too many times in my life that God has put the right people at the right time. But because the storms of life weren't meant to be weathered alone, and we're foolish if we sit there and try to do it on our own. God will put people in our lives when we need it. Not when we want it, when we need it. I've been preaching on this the last couple weeks. God supplies our needs. So he puts people there in our lives at the right time, at the right place, with us through the storms. Next, we'll see another way God deals with the storms. He warns us away from them. Verses 7 through 10, and when he had sailed slowly many days and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed unto Crete over against Solomon. And hardly passing it came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto were the city of Lasea. Now when much time was spent, and when sailing are now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them, and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives. Sometimes we're headed for a storm, and we just don't see it. In this case, God put Paul into their lives to warn them about the trouble that was coming if they didn't turn back. The writer of Proverbs says in Proverbs 12:15, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he that hearkeneth unto counsel is wise. I thank God for the people in my life who has warned me against the storms that are coming, that have told me to turn back, to retreat, to not go towards danger. Now, I haven't always listened, and many times I've played the fool. But more and more I've learned to listen to the advice of godly people, to advice to the people that are in God's will. And more these days I seek it out. God puts warners. The biblical word is admonishers in your life. There to tell us where to go and what's the safest place to be. And when God does that, the best thing you can do is listen to them. And that's so hard for us so many times, is to just simply listen to where God wants us to go. We're so impatient. Most of the time we're set on an action or on a course of action, and the last thing we want to do is to listen to someone else. But remember, Proverbs 12, the way of a fool is right in thy own eyes, but he that hearkeneth unto counsel is wise. Some of the younger people in here today, sometimes the last people you want to listen to is your parents. But God put them there. And He put them there to warn us on certain things, on what not to do. How do you think they know that if you hang with the wrong people, you'll get in trouble? It's not some wisdom they're bestowed on. They go through it. They've been through what is right and what is wrong. They know from experience. I don't know how many times I've talked to kids and teenagers in trouble and had them say to me, I wish I listened to my parents. Sure, that seems old-fashioned. Sure, they're behind the times, but most of the time, their advice, the parents' advice, is exactly what you need to hear, whether you want to hear it or not. And for the older people in here, I think we know exactly what we're talking about. Is you hated when the parents were right all the time, but you knew they were looking out for you. You knew they had the best interest in the heart. Well, the crew decided to ignore Paul's advice in Acts. Look at verse 11 through 13. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart them also, if by any means that might attain to Phoenix, and there to winter, which is an haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. And when the south blew softly, supposing that they had attained their purpose, losing thence, they sailed close by Crete. Two mistakes the centurion made here. First, in verse 11, he followed the advice of the experts instead of God's spokesperson. And the second, in verse 12, he followed the majority. Does anybody realize how dangerous that is? To follow the majority, to ignore people that God had put in your life to be a spokesperson. 12 men went into the land of Canaan to spy it out. 10 men came back and said, there are giants in the land. We look like grasshoppers to them. There's no way we can beat them. But Joshua and Caleb had a different report. When they looked at the land instead of giant warriors, they saw a mighty God who could do anything. Look back over the history of the Israelites and take a look at all the disasters that took place because majority ruled. Over and over we find the prophets ostracized and alone, hated by the very people they were sent to speak to. Why? Because the majority was not willing to listen to God's message. What does that tell us about the leadership of God's people today? Thank God we've gotten away from the dictatorial style that used to be so prevalent. But let's not forget the leaders that we're meant to lead. You don't lead by taking a poll of the followers and then doing what the majority wants. That's not leading, that's following once again. The shepherd doesn't take a survey of the sheep to find out what pasture they want to go to. He starts leading the sheep. Now, this doesn't mean that the leaders can afford to be insensitive to the followers. It doesn't mean ignoring their legitimate need and desires and options or opinions. But it does mean for leaders and followers that God never intended his people to be led by majority rule. He never has, and he never will. Now that was kind of a side road, but let's look back at the ship, because I think I see some clouds on the horizon. Take a verse 14 and 15. But not long after there arose against its tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. Now skip to verse 18 and 19. And we being exceedingly tossed with the tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. God uses storms. Did you know that storms are some of God's best tools? And though I don't believe he causes every storm, I know that he uses every storm. He uses every storm to wake up on our priorities, our needs, and what we value in life. And one of the ways he uses them is to help us clear the decks. We wipe out things in our lives that aren't important. When the storm hits and your life is thrown upside down, that's when we start thinking about what's really important, don't we? Sometimes we need to clear the decks, don't you think? Sometimes we need to get rid of that extra baggage. I don't know about you, but sometimes my deck gets cluttered with things that shouldn't have going on. It gets cluttered with unimportant things. It gets cluttered with useless things. It gets cluttered with things that don't belong there in the first place. And God has used storms in my life to help me clear that out of my life. I thank God for the storms in my life. No, they were not fun going through them, but afterwards and looking back, I grew closer to God because of it. I thank God for the storms that brewed in my life a few years ago. You all know it. I'm not going to say it again, but I look at it like this. We all have a living testimony. No testimony is worse or better than the other. It is a testimony, and you are closer to God because of it, and I thank God for that. You have guys that come up and talk about being drug addicts and being in prison, and they came to the Lord, and while that's all great, I don't think you should have to glorify the life you used to live based on a testimony. And I don't think I can say this clearly enough to make you understand, but I am dead serious when I didn't expect to get the things back that I got back going through those storms. And if you look back at your storms, I'm sure there were things looking back that you didn't expect or deserve to get back either. When I offered the things up to God, I literally walked away. I had given up. Verse 20 is a pretty good description of how I felt. And when neither sun nor stars and many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. Acts 27 verse 20 is one of the saddest and power-packed passages in the entire Bible. It's sad whenever people give up hope. Hope springs eternal, the poet said. That poet was wrong. Sometimes when the night gets dark, we give up, and it's one of the best things we can ever do. because it humbles us. God uses storms to help us clear the deck, but He also uses storms to show us our powerlessness. That's when God sent the angel. Isn't God's timing amazing? Just after we give up, just after we've lost all hope, there He is to save the day. He could have sent the angel any time during that storm. He could have sent it a week before. He could have told Paul before he even stepped on the boat, hey, you are going to have a shipwreck, but everything's going to be fine. He could have told them that. But they probably would have got nothing out of it beforehand. But He didn't send it a week before. He waited until they gave up all hope of being saved by themselves. They did everything they could. They trimmed the sails. They dumped the cargo. They cleared the decks. They did everything that was humanly possible. But they didn't try what was possible by God, which is all things. Let's look at verse 23 and 24. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar. And lo, God hath given all them that sail with thee. Did you know that God won't save you from the storms in your life until you give up on doing it yourself? If you're doing it yourself and God allows you to do it, you're not going to need God, or at least you're going to think that way. It wasn't until all my hope was gone. It wasn't until I gave up all hope of being saved on my own that God finally said, it's going to be all right. I'm going to be there for you. Paul told the men about the angel. They told them they were going to be saved. And then he made the definite statement of chapter 27, verse 25. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told me. I hope you're ready for the storms when it comes. I didn't say if it comes, I said when it comes. Every one of us will go through storms in our lives. And when they come, I hope you trim the sails. I hope you dump the cargo. I hope you clear the deck. I hope you do everything humanly possible to deal with that storm. And then I hope you give up. You say, that's not very nice. When you give up, God will be there. God will catch you. God will help you stand strong. Ask God to deliver from the storm. And then believe that God will fulfill His promise, because when God makes a promise, He fulfills it. And deliver you from the storm. Aren't you glad this morning that God, no matter how bad the storm is, if you trust in Him, if you know He'll be there for you, if you have faith, He will deliver us from whatever we have to go through. At this time, I would like to close in a song. If you will get your psalm book and turn to 119, and the song is Till the Storm Passes By. If you need to pray during this time, come to the altar.